Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone looked at you and saw a problem to be solved instead of a person to be known? If you are somewhere near my age, you know exactly what I mean. And if you are younger, watching this because someone you love is getting older, I need you to hear what I am about to say before we go any further. Because there is a difference between being afraid of dying alone and being afraid of what people will do to you while you are still living. I was never afraid of the first thing. It was the second thing that kept me up at night. My name is Dorothy May. I am 91 years old. I have been a daughter, a wife, a mother, a widow, and for the last 6 years, a woman who lives alone in a house that is too big and too quiet and entirely, stubbornly, completely mine. I have buried my husband Thomas. I have buried two of my closest friends. I have watched my children become people who love me and worry about me in equal measure, sometimes in the same phone call. And I have spent more hours than I care to admit sitting in my old blue armchair by the window, the one my daughter Karen says clashes with everything and which I have absolutely no intention of replacing. Thinking about what it really means to be old in a world that has decided old is something that needs to be managed. I want to talk to you about that. And I want to talk to you about the year my daughter decided I needed help and what happened when we went looking for it and what we found instead. It is not a neat story. Nobody is wrong and then suddenly right. Nobody learns a lesson in the third act and everything is fine. But it is true. And at 91, true is the only kind of story I have any interest in telling. Before I go any further, if this is your first time here, subscribe right now. Not at the end, right now, because this channel is a place where people who have lived long enough to stop being polite finally say what they actually think. There are more stories coming. Subscribe, and let's continue. It started on a Saturday in November. The trees were already bare. The light was that flat gray that makes everything look a little tired. I had been living alone for 4 years at that point. Thomas had been gone 4 years and 2 months. And I was managing. I cooked for myself. I kept the house. I paid my bills, though I will admit the online banking still feels like a magic trick I do not entirely understand. I walked to the end of the block and back every single morning, slowly, but I walked. I called my grandchildren on Sundays. I read. I watched my programs. I was by any reasonable measure a woman who was getting on with things, but Karen had been watching me the way you watch something you expect to break. And that November, she called and said, "Mom, I think we need to talk." And I knew, the way you know things when you have been a mother long enough, this was not going to be a conversation I enjoyed. She drove up on a Saturday. She brought her husband, James, which told me this was serious. Because James treats visiting me the way some people treat going to the dentist. Not unpleasant, exactly, just not something you volunteer for. He is a good man. He simply runs out of things to say to a 91-year-old woman after about 40 minutes, and I have always respected him for not pretending otherwise. He sat at my kitchen table and drank his coffee and let Karen do the talking, which was sensible of both of them. "Mom," she said, "we have been thinking." And the word "we" told me everything. This was not a thought Karen had alone. This was a conversation she and James had been having in their kitchen after the children were in bed. The way parents talk about things they do not want the children to hear, except in this case. I was the child, she said. "We have been thinking it might be time to talk about your options." Options. I have always distrusted that word when it is used the way Karen used it then. Options in that context does not mean freedom. It means We have already decided something, and we are going to present it to you in a way that feels like a choice. I did not say that. I am saying it now, 6 years later, because now I can. But that afternoon I looked at my daughter's face. She has Thomas's forehead, wide and honest, and I saw that she was frightened, not of me, for me, and that changed things. You can be annoyed at someone for being wrong. It is much harder to be annoyed at someone who is simply afraid on your behalf. So I said, "All right, Karen, tell me what you are thinking." And I listened. She had 3 ideas. She had written them down in a notebook she kept slightly out of my line of sight, which I thought was considerate, and also quietly hilarious, because I taught her to be organized, and now she was hiding her organizational skills from me. Option 1, come and live with her and James. Option 2, a caregiver. Someone to come in during the week, help with the house and the shopping, what she called the day-to-day. Option 3, she said this one quietly. The way you say something you know might sting. Option 3 was looking at some communities, places with staff, other people my age, where I would be safe. I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks, and then I called Karen back and said, "Let's try the first one. I'll come and stay with you for a while. Let's see how it goes. I want to tell you about those 8 weeks. Karen's house is warm and well kept, and her grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, are loud and wonderful in the way only very small children can be. Little Leo, who was 4 then, used to climb into my lap without asking, like it was his right. I had not had a small child in my lap in years. I had forgotten the weight of it, that specific, alive, trusting weight. But here is the thing about living in your daughter's house at 91. You become a guest, not because anyone means it, not because Karen and James were not kind. They were unfailingly kind. And sometimes that kindness felt like a door closing very softly in my face. They had a routine, a beautiful, tightly scheduled routine built around their lives, their children's school days, James's work hours, Karen's job, which involves computers in ways I have never entirely understood, but which clearly pays well. And into this routine I was inserted like a piece of furniture that did not quite fit, but which everyone agreed to work around. Dinner was at 6. Not because I wanted dinner at 6. I have never been a 6 o'clock dinner person. Thomas and I always ate late, 7:30, sometimes 8 with the news on low in the background, but 6 was when the children ate, and so I ate at 6, and I smiled, and I was grateful. I woke at 5 in the morning, the way I always have, and lay still in the dark of the guest room so I would not disturb anyone. The guest room had a good mattress. It smelled of lavender, lovely, objectively lovely, and not the smell of my house, not Thomas's smell. That smell is gone from everywhere now, except sometimes in the back of the wardrobe I think I catch something. Maybe that is just longing, making things up. At my age, longing is very creative. I was helpful where I could be. I read to the grandchildren. I folded laundry. I still fold laundry faster and cleaner than anyone I have ever met. 60 years of practice will do that. But one evening I was walking down the hallway and I heard James's voice through the kitchen wall. Just a fragment, something about the mornings, the schedule, then Karen's voice, lower, then silence. I stood in that hallway and I thought, I have become a schedule problem. I did not cry then. I cried later in the lavender-smelling guest room, quietly, with my face turned toward the window so the sound would not carry. Not from sadness exactly, more like the shaking kind of crying that comes from finally admitting something to yourself. I called Karen the next morning and told her I wanted to try the second option. She sounded relieved, and I loved her too much to be hurt by that. The caregiver arrived on a Monday morning in January. Her name was Sandra. She was a brisk, efficient woman of about 55 who had clearly cared for many elderly people and had her methods firmly in place. She was not unkind. She was professional. She arrived at 8 and left at 4, and in between she cleaned my kitchen in a way that meant I could not find anything for 3 days. She made me lunch that was nutritionally correct and completely without salt. She controlled the television remote in ways that were subtle and absolute. And she called me Mrs. Washington after 40 years of being Dorothy, of being Mama, of being Grandma Dot. I was Mrs. Washington, which was my mother-in-law's name. God rest her complicated soul. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking I was ungrateful. Maybe a little, but let me explain. Something about what it means to have a stranger in your kitchen when you are old and alone. Your kitchen is not just a room. It is the room where everything important in your life happened. I made my children's lunches at that counter for 22 years. I cried into that sink the morning after my mother died. I danced badly and slowly with Thomas in that kitchen the night we found out Karen had passed her exams because he had had a glass of wine and I had had two, and we were so happy we did not know what to do with it. That kitchen is 40 years of my life pressed into the walls, and Sandra's presence in it, however well-meaning, felt like someone walking through a church while the service is still going on. Polite, but wrong. And then there was the money. I have not talked about the money yet, but it mattered. Thomas left me comfortable, but not wealthy. My pension is modest. Sandra's agency cost more per month than I was prepared for. Karen offered to help. I let her for 3 months. And then one evening I sat down and I looked at the numbers, really looked at them, the way I used to look at the household accounts in the lean years. Thomas was a teacher. We had 4 children. Lean years were most years. And I thought, this is not sustainable, not without becoming a burden on my daughter. And I have never, not once in 91 years, wanted to be a burden on anyone. I may have many flaws, stubbornness chief among them, according to everyone who has ever loved me. But I have always carried my own weight. So I told Karen to cancel the agency. She cried. I said, Karen, this is not a tragedy. This is just thinking. She said, Mom, then what? What do you want? I said, let me think. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mom, please also think about the communities. Just go and look. I promised myself I would be fair about this part. I know there are places that are good and kind and dignified. I am not going to tell you every such place is a warehouse for the nearly dead. But I will tell you what I felt when we visited the one Karen had found. A bright place, cheerful colors, a common room with a piano no one was playing, a garden that was nicely kept, staff who called me. Sweetheart, within 5 minutes of meeting me, they showed me a single room with a window looking over a courtyard, a bathroom with handrails, a board on the wall with the day's date and the day's activities. Morning stretches at 9, crafts at 10, lunch at 12, a film at 2, social hour at 4. I stood in that room and I thought, I have been making my own decisions since 1935. I have outlived a depression, a war, 4 presidents I admired, and 6 I did not. I have been making my own decisions every single day of my life for 9 decades. And now a kind young woman with a clipboard is going to tell me that at 2 o'clock I will watch a film and at 4 I will socialize. I have never once in my entire life socialized on a schedule. I smiled. I asked polite questions. And on the drive home, I looked out the window and I thought, not yet. I am not ready to give up the last thing that makes me me, which is the right to decide what I do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That right is not a luxury. At 91, after everything life takes from you, the husband, the strength, the steadiness of your hands, the friends who leave one by one until you count them on one hand and still have fingers left, that right is the last essential thing, and I was not ready to hand it to a clipboard. I told Karen, not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet. And she was quiet in the way that meant she was worried, but also, somewhere underneath the worry, relieved to still hear the fight in me, because Karen has been listening to the fight in me her whole life, and I think some part of her would have been more frightened if it had gone. So there we were. No daughter's house, no agency, no community with a 2 o'clock film. Just me and my big quiet house and the green armchair and a problem that had not, despite everyone's efforts, been solved. What happened next was not planned. I want to be very clear about that. I did not have a strategy. I was not clever. What happened was that I was tired and lonely, and I went outside to get the mail, which I know sounds small, but some days at 91, going outside to get the mail is an event. Standing at the mailbox next door, the house that had been empty for 2 years, and then in October had suddenly acquired new tenants, was a young woman I had not properly met yet. She was wrestling with a stroller, a paper bag of groceries, and a toddler who had decided that this precise moment was the moment to sit down on the pavement and refuse to move. She looked the way people look when they have been holding everything together all day with one hand, and they need one more hand. I know that look. I wore it for 15 years of raising children and working and keeping everything moving. I know it in the bones. I said, "Can I hold something?" She looked at me the way you look at someone when you have been running so hard you have forgotten other people exist. And then she said, "Yes, please." I held the paper bag. She picked up the toddler, got the stroller open, got the groceries sorted, got the baby settled. Then she looked at me and said, "I am so sorry. I am such a mess." I said, "I am Dorothy, and I am the opposite of a mess, which is not always as good as it sounds." She laughed. "The surprised kind, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. That was how it started, not with a plan, not with a program, with a paper bag and a toddler who did not want to walk. Her name was Amara. She was 29 years old. She had moved next door from across the city following a job that had been eliminated 4 months after she arrived. She was a single mother. The toddler, Noah, was hers. There was also a daughter, Zoe, who was 7, with her mother's eyes and very definite thoughts about most things. There was no partner currently in the picture. She did not offer details. I did not ask. At 91, understand that not every story needs its full context to be understood. The important thing was this. She was alone in a new place with 2 small children and a job search that was not going well, and no one to call at 7 in. The morning when Noah had a fever and she needed to get Zoe to school, she had no one to call. That was the thing that got me. I have been that, not at 29, but after Thomas died, when the children lived their lives an hour away, and the phone felt like a prop in a play, and the mornings were so quiet they made your teeth ache, I knew the shape of that loneliness. I recognized it in her the way you recognize a language you once spoke. We started small. She would knock in the morning sometimes. Zoe needed to be at school by 8:15. Noah was feverish. Could he stay with me for an hour? Of course he could. Noah was not a placid child. He had opinions about what to eat, what to touch, what belonged where, but he was also warm and curious. He used to press his whole face against the glass of my cabinet where I keep the blue dishes, Thomas's mother's dishes, the ones I never use, and breathe on it and stare at his own foggy reflection like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. I found that unbearably lovable. I still do. And Zoe was 7, which is an age I have always found underrated. 7-year-olds are old enough to have real conversations and young enough to still find old women interesting instead of embarrassing. She sat at my kitchen table doing her homework while I made my dinner, my late dinner, the one I had gone back to eating now that no one else's schedule applied. And she asked me questions the way 7-year-olds do, without filtering for what is appropriate. She asked me why my hands shook. She asked me if I had been alive during the war. She asked me once, very seriously, whether I was afraid of dying. And I said, a little, but mostly I am just very tired by 9 o'clock. And she laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. I had not made a child laugh like that in years. I had not realized how much I had missed. And Amara, in turn, started coming to check on me. Not in the Karen way, not with the weight of worry pressing against everything she said. She just knocked. She brought things sometimes, a container of whatever she had made for dinner. She went through a phase with something called shakshuka that I have complicated feelings about. She would sit in my kitchen while I made tea and talk, really talk, the way people used to talk before everyone started looking at their phones in every available silence. She told me about her mother who was ailing far away, about the job search, about Noah's father, eventually in pieces, without self-pity, but without pretending either. She told me her real fears, not the polished version. She was afraid she was not enough for her children. She was afraid the money would not last. She was afraid she had made a mistake coming here, and there was no way yet to know if she had. And I recognized all of it. The specifics were different. Her life and mine are separated by 6 decades and more, change than either of us could account for. But fear arranges itself the same way in a woman's chest in 1967 and in 2018. Fear does not update its methods. I told her things too, things I had not told anyone in a long time because there was no one left to tell them to. I told her about Thomas, the real Thomas, not the sanded down version you present at funerals, the complicated man who was brilliant and sometimes selfish and who loved me in ways that were imperfect and real. I told her about the year after he died, when I used to leave his coffee cup on the counter every morning because I was not ready to put it away yet. I told her about my friend Ruth Simmons, who was the funniest person I have ever known, who died of a stroke at 78 in the middle of a sentence, which was, her daughter said, exactly how Ruth would have wanted it. I had not talked about Ruth to anyone in years because the people who remembered her as I did were mostly gone. Amara did not know Ruth, but she listened, and that was enough. It might have been more than enough. It might have been exactly what I needed. By spring, things had shifted in ways that were hard to describe but impossible to miss. I watched Noah 2 mornings a week so Amara could go to interviews. Zoe had developed the habit of stopping at my door on her way home from school, just to say hello, she always said, just to see if I needed anything, though she was 7 and what she actually needed was to sit in a quiet kitchen with someone who was not stressed, and I could give her that. Amara helped me with the grocery shopping, not the choosing. I can still choose a tomato better than anyone, but the carrying, the lifting, the logistics of a body that does not always cooperate. She changed a light bulb I had been leaving alone for 6 weeks because the step stool and I were no longer on speaking terms. I killed her basil plants 3 times before I finally grew her a new one from my own, which I felt quietly proud of. Karen visited in April. On the Saturday afternoon, Amara knocked with Noah on her hip and a question about whether I had any time, which I did, and which turned into Amara and Karen sitting at my kitchen table for an Asino hour talking about a television program they had both been watching, while Noah tried to fit a wooden spoon into his mouth, and I made tea, and Zoe read in the corner with her legs over the arm of the chair the way children do when they are comfortable somewhere. Karen was quiet on Sunday morning. Before she left, she said, "Mom, you seem," and she stopped. I waited. She said, "You seem like yourself." I did not know what to say to that. I had not known I had stopped seeming like myself. But I think she was right. Somewhere in those months, in the business of being useful and being needed and being honest with someone and being listened to in return, I had come back to something I had been drifting from, not the person I was when I was young. You cannot go back, and I have never wanted to. There is too much I know now that I did not know then. But the person I had always been when I was most myself, stubborn, interested, particular about tomatoes, willing to kill the basil 3 times before getting it right. I am 91 years old. I live alone. I fell last January in the hallway, not the bathroom, though I appreciate the dignity of the distinction. I lay there for a moment looking up at the ceiling, and I thought very clearly, this is the moment Karen warned me about. And then I thought, I am fine. I am not hurt. I am going to get up. And I did. It took a while, but I did. I did not tell Karen for 2 weeks. I told Amara. Now I want to speak to you directly, because if you have stayed with me this long, something in this story is sitting close to something in yours. So here is what I have learned at 91, the hard way, the long way, over more years than most people get. The first thing, do not let anyone turn you into a problem before you have decided you are one. There will be people who love you, who will look at your life and see risk. They will see the step stool and the light bulb and the online banking and the quiet mornings, and they will see danger. And they will want to manage the danger because they love you, and love, when it is frightened, sometimes looks exactly like control. You are allowed to say, not yet. You are allowed to say, I am still here. I am still thinking. Let me think. The second thing, the help you need is probably not the help anyone is offering. I did not need a caregiver. I did not need to move in with my daughter. I did not need a schedule and a 2 o'clock film and a cheerful young woman with a clipboard. I needed a paper bag held at a mailbox. I needed a child to laugh at my jokes. I needed someone to sit across from me and tell the truth while I told mine back. That is not a service. That is not an option. That is just a human being near another human being in the ordinary way people used to be before we built lives. So insulated. We forgot that is how people survive. The third thing, you still have something to give. I know how easy it is when everything is hard, when your body is slower and your world is smaller and the people you love best are mostly gone. I know how easy it is to start believing that you are only a receiver now, only a need, only a weight. You are not. I watched a toddler 2 mornings a week, and it was not charity, it was exchange. Amara needed 2 hours, I needed to be needed. We were even. There is no age at which you stop being useful. There is only the age at which you stop believing you are. The fourth thing, knock on a door. I mean this literally. Before you agree to any arrangement that takes away your right to decide what you do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, knock on one door near you that you have not knocked on before. Say hello. Offer something small. Hold a paper bag. You do not know who is on the other side of that door waiting for exactly what you have to give. I did not know. I could not have planned it. But I went outside to get the mail on a gray, quiet morning because I was tired and lonely and needed some air. And that was enough. That was all it took. I am 91 years old. I live alone in my house, in my armchair, with my late dinner and my grandchildren on Sundays, and my neighbor's daughter's footsteps on my porch every afternoon after school. I am not managed. I am not a VAFID. Schedule problem. I am not Mrs. Washington to a stranger who means well. I am Dorothy May, and this morning I made my own lunch. And Noah, who is 3 now and opinionated about everything, told his mother last week without any prompting that I am his best friend, and I had to go find something in the kitchen so she would not see my face. That is enough. That is. I have finally understood exactly enough. If this story said something you needed to hear, share it. Send it to someone whose parent is getting older and who does not know what to do. Send it to someone who is 91 and still fighting. Send it to yourself on the days when being old feels like being invisible. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you are not yet, subscribe, do it now. Because the most important conversations are the ones nobody is having. This channel is where we finally have them. Take care of yourself, and before you give up any part of who you are, make sure you have gone outside and gotten the mail first. You never know who is standing at the next mailbox.